10-year-old Kalia moved silently between the massive trunks, her azure skin allowing her to blend perfectly with the surroundings. She wasn't supposed to be here. The Shadow Forest was forbidden territory for all Signians, especially for the adopted daughter of Vorlog, the High Counselor. But Kalia couldn't resist. Confined within the marble walls of the city her entire life, stories of the wild forest beyond had filled her dreams for years. When the guard rotation left a small window of opportunity, she had slipped away without a second thought. Now, surrounded by the exotic beauty of untamed wilderness, she felt truly alive for the first time. Massive blue-leaf trees towered above her, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that filtered the harsh sunlight into gentle beams. Strange creatures with 6 legs and translucent wings darted between flowering vines. The world beyond the city was more magnificent than she had ever imagined. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, pushing deeper into the forest. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened across the forest floor, and Kalia realized with a start that she had lost track of both time and direction. The landmarks she had carefully noted were nowhere to be seen. An unfamiliar chill settled over her as she turned in a slow circle, trying to find anything recognizable. "I should have turned back sooner," she admitted to the empty forest. A distant sound caught her attention, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Kalia froze, her heart pounding against her ribcage. She had heard stories of the shadow predators, the apex hunters of Cygnus Prime, beasts that could blend into darkness itself, with eyes that burned like coals and claws that could slice through metal. Surely those were just tales to frighten children. The growl came again, closer this time. Definitely not a tale. Panic seized her as she broke into a run, no longer caring which direction led home. Branches whipped against her face and arms as she crashed through the undergrowth. The growling followed, gaining ground with each passing second. Kalia burst into a small clearing and hesitated, momentarily confused by the sudden open space. That pause proved costly. Something massive struck her from behind, sending her tumbling across the forest floor. Sharp pain lanced through her leg as the claws raked across her thigh. She screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the trees. Rolling onto her back, Kalia finally saw her attacker. The shadow predator was like a living piece of darkness. Its body seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making its exact shape difficult to discern. Only its eyes were clearly visible, twin orbs of burning amber that fixed on her with predatory intelligence. The creature advanced slowly, savoring the hunt. Kalia tried to crawl backward, but her injured leg gave way beneath her. Tears streamed down her face as she realized this beautiful forbidden forest would be her grave. The predator tensed, preparing for the final leap. Something whistled through the air. A makeshift spear embedded itself in the ground beside the creature, causing it to snarl and whip around toward this new threat. "Hey, over here, you overgrown shadow!" A human boy, no more than 12 years old, stood at the edge of the clearing. He was clad in crude armor fashioned from what looked like spacecraft debris, and he held another spear in his right hand. Despite his youth, his stance showed no fear, only calculated readiness. The shadow predator's attention shifted completely from Kalia to this new, more interesting prey. It moved with frightening speed, darting toward the boy in a blur of darkness. But the human was ready. He rolled to the side at the last possible moment, bringing his spear up to slash at the creature's flank. The predator howled in rage rather than pain. "Its hide is too thick for a direct hit," the boy muttered to himself. "Need to find a weak spot." He circled warily, keeping the creature's attention fixed on him rather than the injured alien girl. The shadow predator stalked after him, moving with unnatural silence despite its size. "Come on, show me something I can use," the boy whispered, studying the beast's movements. The predator lunged again. This time the boy wasn't quite fast enough. Claws grazed his shoulder, tearing through his makeshift armor. He grunted in pain but used the creature's momentum to drive his spear toward what he hoped was a vulnerable spot, the junction between neck and shoulder. The spear penetrated slightly, drawing a roar of fury from the beast. In retaliation, it snapped forward with terrifying speed, jaws closing around the boy's forearm. His scream echoed through the forest. The predator released him, seemingly satisfied with the damage it had inflicted. The boy staggered back, clutching his arm. Black, viscous venom mixed with his blood, spreading visibly beneath his skin like dark lightning. Kalia watched in horror, knowing the toxin was fatal to her kind. For a human, the effects were unknown, but surely no less deadly. Despite what must have been excruciating pain, the boy didn't flee. Instead, his face contorted with determination as he retrieved his fallen spear with his good arm. "You picked the wrong prey today," he growled through clenched teeth. The shadow predator circled again, but its movements seemed more cautious now, as if it sensed something had changed. The boy waited, watching, then suddenly darted forward with unexpected speed. This time his aim was perfect. The spear drove deep into the predator's eye, one of the few vulnerable points on its armored body. The creature thrashed wildly, dislodging the weapon before retreating into the shadows of the forest, howling in pain and rage. The boy stood motionless for several seconds, ensuring the threat had truly passed. Then, without a word, he staggered over to Kaelia and collapsed to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, his voice strained. Kaelia stared at him in shock. "Your arm, the venom. Worry about that later. Can you walk?" When she shook her head, he nodded grimly. "Then I'll have to carry you." "But you're injured, and the city is miles away." "Better start walking then." With his good arm, he helped her to her feet, supporting her weight against his side. "I'm Kaelia," she said as they began their slow journey. "Kian," he replied simply. Pain etched lines in his young face as they moved through the forest. The black veins spreading from his wound now reached his shoulder, and sweat beaded on his forehead. But he never complained, never faltered. As night fell completely, new dangers emerged. Glowing blue fungi illuminated patches of the forest floor, creating eerie pools of light. Strange calls echoed through the darkness, some belonging to nocturnal herbivores, others to predators awakening for their nightly hunt. "Stay in the shadows," Kian whispered, guiding them away from the glowing fungi. "The light attracts night hunters." No sooner had he spoken than a rustling sound came from nearby. Something large was moving through the undergrowth, circling them. "Don't run," Kian said, his voice steady despite his obvious pain. "It senses fear." A creature emerged into a patch of bioluminescence, a six-legged hunter with translucent skin that revealed pulsing internal organs. Its snout twitched as it scented the air, detecting their blood. Kian slowly reached down, grasping a heavy stone from the forest floor. With a precision that belied his weakened state, he hurled the stone deep into the forest, away from their position. The sound of it crashing through branches drew the creature's attention, and after a moment's hesitation, it bounded off in pursuit of the noise. "My father taught me that trick," Kian explained as they continued their difficult journey, before he died. "How long have you been alone?" Kalia asked, trying to distract him from the pain that was clearly growing worse. 3 months. A shadow predator got him too. We were hunting and..." His voice trailed off. "He taught me everything he could about surviving here. Said I might be the last human on this planet someday." The revelation stunned Kalia. The human ship crash had been a distant event in her childhood, something the adults discussed in hushed tones. She had never imagined survivors living in the wild forest beyond the city walls. Their progress slowed as Kian's strength began to wane. The venom was spreading, the black veins now visible across his chest. His breathing grew labored, and twice he stumbled, nearly sending them both to the ground. "We need to rest," Kalia insisted. "No," Kian shook his head. "The venom, I can feel it spreading. If I stop now, I might not get up again." So they continued, each step a testament to the boy's incredible will. Somehow, despite the pain and growing weakness, he maintained his sense of direction, leading them steadily toward the Signian city. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the outskirts. The white marble spires of the city gleamed in the early light, a stark contrast to the wild blue forest they had traversed. The city guards spotted them immediately, rushing forward with weapons drawn. They stopped short at the sight of the High Counselor's daughter leaning on a human boy, both covered in blood. "Get my father," Kalia commanded with all the authority her 10-year-old voice could muster. "And call the healers." Now, the throne room of High Council of Vorlog was a marvel of Signian architecture. Soaring blue marble columns supporting a domed ceiling inlaid with patterns that mimic the night sky. But at this moment, none of its beauty registered with Kaelia. She sat on a bench near her father's throne, her injured leg bandaged, watching as the healers bent over Keon's motionless form. Vorlog stood nearby, his tall frame and commanding presence filling the room even in silence. His blue skin was several shades darker than Kaelinilaya's, marked with the subtle patterns that denoted his high rank. His silver eyes hadn't left his adopted daughter since she was brought in. "You broke our most sacred law," he finally said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "You left the safety of our walls and entered the forbidden forest." Kaelia lowered her gaze. "Yes, Father. You could have died out there. I know I would have if not for him." She looked toward Kian. Vorlog followed her gaze. "A human child, one of the crash survivors, I presume." One of the healers approached, his expression grave. "High Counselor, we have a situation. The boy has been infected with shadow predator venom." "Then he is lost," Vorlog stated flatly. "No one survives such poisoning." "That's just it, sir. His body isn't rejecting the venom as ours would. It's absorbing it. There's some kind of symbiosis occurring that I have never seen before." Vorlog moved closer to examine the unconscious boy. Keon's skin around the wound had turned an unnatural gray-black, with dark veins spreading across his chest. Yet his breathing was steady, his pulse strong. "Will he live?" Kaelia asked anxiously. "I believe so," the healer replied, still sounding bewildered. "But what this venom will do to his human physiology, I cannot say." Keon stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Despite his condition, he tried to sit up, instinctively defensive in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Easy, boy," Vorlog said, placing a restraining hand on Keon's shoulder. "You're safe here." Keon's gaze darted around the room before settling on Kaelia. "You're okay?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thanks to you." Vorlog studied the human child with newfound interest. In all his years, he had never witnessed such courage and determination in one so young. This boy had risked his life for a stranger, an alien no less, with no thought of reward or recognition. "You saved the blood of my house," Vorlog declared formally. "By our most ancient laws, I am in your debt." Kian looked confused. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Vorlog said firmly. "You did what few would have the courage to attempt." "Tell me, boy, where is your family?" Keon's expression darkened. "My father died 3 months ago. A shadow predator got him too, while we were hunting. There's no one else. Our ship crashed here when I was 2. Most died in the impact. The rest, the forest took them, one by one. I'm the last human on Cygnus Prime now." Vorlog nodded thoughtfully. "Then from this day forward, my house shall be your house. You will grow alongside Kaelia as my son. You will learn our ways, and perhaps we will learn something of your resilience." The decision was met with murmurs from the assembled court. One elder Signian stepped forward, his face etched with disapproval. "High Counselor, this is unprecedented. A human child raised among us, learning our ways. This goes against our most sacred traditions." Vorlog's expression hardened. "Our most sacred tradition is honoring life debts, Elder Narix. Or have you forgotten the codes of valor that have guided our people for millennia?" The elder retreated, chastened but unconvinced. Keon, still weak from the venom coursing through his system, looked around at the sea of blue faces. All strangers, all alien. He thought of his father, of the small shelter they had built together at the edge of the forest, the only home he had known since the crash. "I have nowhere else to go," he admitted, his young voice steady despite his fear. "But I won't be a burden. I can hunt. I can set traps. I know which plants are safe to eat." Kaelia, still seated nearby with her bandaged leg, leaned forward. "You saved me when you could have just walked away. That makes you braver than half the warriors in this room." Her words brought a flush of pride to Keon's face. Vorlog noticed the exchange and nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "The decision is made," he declared. "The boy stays. He will be given quarters in the East Wing, near the healing chambers. The venom's effects must be monitored." And he turned to the chief healer. I want daily reports on his condition." As the court dispersed, Keon swayed on his feet, the room spinning around him. The last thing he remembered before collapsing was Kalia's concerned face and the firm grip of Vorlog's hand on his shoulder. For 3 days, Keon drifted in and out of consciousness, his body burning with fever as it fought to integrate the alien venom. In his delirium, he called out for his father, reliving the terrible day when the shadow predator had taken him. Sometimes he thought he saw his father standing at the foot of his bed, smiling sadly before dissolving into shadow. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Keon awoke to find Kalelia sitting beside his bed, attempting to read a human book salvaged from the horizon crash. Her pronunciation of English was awkward, but determined. Trees provide oxygen for all life on Earth," she read haltingly. "That's not how you say provide," Keon said, his voice raspy from disuse. Kalia nearly dropped the book in surprise. "You're awake!" Her silver eyes lit up with genuine relief. "The healers weren't sure if you would survive. The venom has changed you." Keon looked down at his arm. Dark veins had spread from the bite wound, creating an intricate pattern across his skin that pulsed faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. "It doesn't hurt anymore," he said with surprise. "The healers say it's like nothing they have ever seen. Your body didn't fight the venom, it absorbed it." She hesitated. "They're not sure what it might do to you." Keon flexed his fingers, feeling a new strength flowing through them. "I feel different, stronger." He glanced at the book in her hands. That was my father's, a scientific text about Earth's ecosystems. I thought learning about your world might help you feel less alone here," Kalia admitted, a darker blue flush coloring her cheeks. It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Despite the initial suspicion from many Signians, Keon gradually found his place in their society. Vorlog ensured he received the same education as Kalia did, though Keon struggled with the abstract concepts of Signian mathematics in their complex language. Where he excelled was in the physical training. The venom had indeed changed him, granting him reflexes and sensory awareness beyond normal human capability. He could sense shifts in the air currents before an attack came, could anticipate movements before they happened. The Signian combat instructors were both impressed and disturbed by his growing abilities. 6 months after his arrival, the nightmares began. Keon would wake screaming, his body drenched in sweat, the markings on his arm glowing with an eerie light. The dreams were always the same. He was running through the forest, but not as himself. He saw through different eyes, felt the hunger of a predator, the thrill of the hunt. Vorlag called in specialists, worried that the venom was consuming the boy's mind. None could explain the connection forming between Keon and the wild creatures of Cygnus Prime. One night, after a particularly vivid nightmare, Keon slipped out of his quarters and made his way to the palace gardens. The moons of Cygnus Prime cast long shadows across the ornamental pools and carefully tended blue flora. "You shouldn't be out here alone," came Kalia's voice from behind him. Keon didn't turn, unsurprised that she had followed him. In the months they had spent together, they had developed an almost preternatural awareness of each other's movements. "I had the dream again," he said quietly. "But this time it was different. I wasn't just seeing through their eyes, I was calling to them. And they were answering." Kalia moved to stand beside him, her expression concerned. "The shadow predators?" He nodded. "It's like they recognize me now, like I'm part of their world somehow." He looked down at the patterns on his arm. "What's happening to me, Kalia?" She took his marked hand in her blue one, a gesture of trust that transcended their different species. "Whatever it is, you're not facing it alone. Remember that." The incident that truly changed the palace's perception of Keon came a year after his arrival. A diplomatic delegation from a neighboring system was visiting Cygnus Prime, their first contact with the Signians in decades. During a formal garden reception, the young son of one diplomat wandered away from the gathering, fascinated by the exotic plants. Keon, now 11, noticed the child's absence first. Something in his newly enhanced senses triggered a warning. A shift in the garden's atmosphere, a subtle change in the air currents that signaled danger. Without a word to anyone, he slipped away from the reception, following instincts he didn't fully understand. He found the child near the far wall of the garden, reaching for a beautiful but deadly bloom. the azure siren, whose pollen could paralyze a Signian in seconds. "Stop!" Kian called out, but too late. The flower released its cloud of pollen as the child's fingers brushed its petals. Moving with inhuman speed, Kian threw himself between the child and the deadly cloud, inhaling the pollen himself. He collapsed instantly, his respiratory system seizing as the toxin took effect. Guards found them moments later, the foreign child unharmed, Kian convulsing on the ground, fighting for breath. They rushed him to the healing chambers, where the healers worked desperately to counteract the poison. To everyone's shock, the venom in Kian's system began to fight back against the new toxin. The markings on his arm spread further, glowing brightly as his body engaged in an internal war. After hours of struggle, Kian took a deep, shuddering breath. The azure siren's pollen had been neutralized. When he finally awoke, Vorlog was sitting beside his bed, his expression thoughtful. "You risked your life for a child you didn't know, from a species not your own," the High Counselor observed. Kian shrugged weakly. "He was just a kid, in danger. I didn't think about it." "Precisely," Vorlog said with a slight smile. "You acted purely on instinct, an instinct to protect, not to harm." He leaned forward. "Do you understand how rare that is, Kian? Most beings, when given power, think first of how to use it for themselves." From that day forward, Kian's position in the palace changed. No longer viewed with suspicion, he became something of a marvel. The human boy with the heart of a guardian and the growing powers of a Signian predator. As the years passed, those powers continued to develop in unexpected ways. By the time he was 15, Kian could communicate on a rudimentary level with certain wildlife of Cygnus Prime, not with words, but with impressions, emotions, intentions. The shadow predators in particular seemed to recognize him as neither prey nor predator, but something else entirely, a bridge between worlds. But not all admired his growing abilities. A faction within the Signian government, led by Elder Narix, watched Kian's development with suspicion and fear. They believed his connection to the wild predators posed a threat to the carefully ordered Signian society. This tension came to a head when Kian was 16. A series of attacks occurred on outlying Signian settlements, coordinated strikes by shadow predators that left several dead and many injured. Elder Narix immediately blamed Kian, suggesting he had somehow influenced the creatures to attack. "The human has corrupted these beasts with his alien presence," Narix declared before the High Council. "His very existence threatens our way of life." Vorlog dismissed the accusations, but doubt had been planted. Even some who had previously supported Kian began to question whether his strange powers might be dangerous. Determined to prove his innocence, Kian embarked on a dangerous mission. Against Vorlog's direct orders, he ventured alone into the Shadow Forest to track the predators responsible for the attacks. 3 days later, he returned, battered and exhausted, but with crucial information. The attacking predators weren't native to the Signian territories. They had been driven from their usual hunting grounds by unauthorized mining operations in the far western mountains, operations secretly authorized by none other than Elder Narix himself. The revelation caused an uproar in the council. Narix was stripped of his position and exiled from the city, but the incident left a lasting mark on Kian. He had confronted a pack of enraged shadow predators, communicated with them through his unique connection, and somehow convinced them to spare him long enough to understand their situation. "They recognized me," he explained to Vorlog afterward, "not as human or Signian, but as something in between, something that understood both worlds." Kalia, now 16 herself, had grown into a fiercely intelligent young woman with a warrior's spirit. Where Kian connected with the wild, she excelled in strategy and diplomacy. Together they formed a complementary pair, each filling the gaps in the other's abilities. Their closeness did not go unnoticed. Palace gossip speculated about the nature of their relationship, some finding it scandalous that the High Counselor's daughter should be so attached to a human, regardless of his unusual abilities. Vorlog, for his part, watched their bond develop with a mixture of approval and concern. He recognized the political complications it could create, yet he couldn't deny the strength they drew from each other. When Kian turned 16, Vorlog summoned him to a private meeting in his study. The High Counselor stood before a wall of ancient weapons, remnants of a time when Signians had been more warrior than diplomat. "It is time you chose your path," Vorlog said without preamble. "You stand between worlds, Kion of Earth, neither fully human nor Signian, but something unique." Kion straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment. "What are my options?" "You could return to your human roots. We've maintained the horizon in your absence. With proper supplies, it could be made space-worthy again. You could seek out other human colonies." The offer hung in the air between them. Kion thought of Earth, a planet he had never seen, known only through his father's stories in the ship's databases. "And my other option?" he asked quietly. Vorlog took down an ornate blade from the wall, a ceremonial weapon with a curved edge that shimmered in the light. "Become formally bonded to our house. Not just as a ward, but as a son of Cygnus Prime. It would mean committing your life to our people, to using your unique abilities in service of our world." Kion stared at the blade, understanding the significance of the offer. "And Kalia, where does she stand on this?" A slight smile touched Vorlog's lips. "She threatened to follow you to the stars if you chose to leave. My daughter has never been one to accept loss gracefully." His expression grew more serious. "Your bond with her complicates matters, politically speaking. There are those who would never accept a human as a potential consort to the future High Counselor." "I never asked for that position," Kion said quickly. "No, but destiny rarely consults us before placing its burdens on our shoulders." Vorlog extended the blade toward Kion. "Whatever you decide, know that you have earned a place here through your actions, not just my decree." Kion took the weapon, feeling its perfect balance. In that moment, the markings on his arm pulsed strongly, as if responding to his emotions. "Cygnus Prime is my home," he said firmly. "It has been since the day my father died. I'll stay and serve however I can." Vorlog nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Then your real training begins tomorrow. Not just combat and academics, but how to use the gifts the Venom has given you. They are growing stronger, Kion. You must learn to master them before they master you." The next 4 years were the most challenging of Kion's life. Vorlog appointed specialized trainers, warriors, scientists, even mystics from the remote mountain communities who still practiced the old ways of communing with Cygnus Prime's ecosystem. Kion learned to extend his awareness beyond his physical body, to sense the complex web of life that connected all creatures on the planet. He discovered he could influence the behavior of predatory species, not through domination, but through a form of mutual respect. The markings continued to spread across his body, covering most of his torso and parts of his neck by the time he reached 20. They no longer frightened him. They were part of him now, a visual representation of the symbiosis between his human DNA and the essence of Cygnus Prime. Kalia trained alongside him when her royal duties permitted. Her combat skills nearly matched his now, though she lacked his supernatural advantages. What she possessed instead was a brilliant tactical mind and unshakable determination. They made a formidable team, completing several dangerous missions for Vorlog beyond the city walls, mapping unexplored territories, establishing outposts, and occasionally rescuing Signian researchers who ventured too far into predator territories. One such mission nearly cost them their lives. They had been sent to investigate the sudden disappearance of a research team in the northern mountains. What they found was horrifying. Evidence of systematic hunting and capturing of shadow predators by unknown off-world entities. Following the trail, they discovered a hidden facility deep within a mountain cave. Inside, alien technology far beyond Signian design was being used to extract and process venom from captured predators. "Who would do this?" Kalia whispered as they observed from a hidden vantage point. Kion's eyes narrowed as he studied the equipment. "Look at the design of those containment cells. The same blade-like aesthetics we'll later see on their ship. This has to be the Phalanx. They've been here studying our world in secret." Before Kalia could respond, an alarm sounded. They had been detected. Armed guards poured into the chamber. Humanoid, but clearly not Signian, with metallic skin and cold, pupilless eyes. Their appearance matched exactly what they would later recognize as Phalanx soldiers. "Run!" Kion shouted, pushing Kalia toward the exit as he turned to face their pursuers. The ensuing battle was brutal. Kion's enhanced abilities allowed him to match the strange soldiers in combat, but they were many and he was one. A blast from an energy weapon caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. As the soldiers closed in for the kill, Keon felt something shift within him. The markings across his body blazed with dark light, and a primal roar tore from his throat, a sound no human should have been able to make. The soldiers hesitated, suddenly uncertain. That moment of pause was all Keon needed. With speed and strength beyond anything he had demonstrated before, he tore through their ranks, his hands moving with the deadly precision of a predator's claws. When it was over, Keon stood panting amid the fallen soldiers, horrified by what he had done. Kalia approached cautiously, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Keon," she said softly. He looked at his hands, expecting to see claws, blood. They were normal, human, though the markings pulsed visibly beneath his skin. "I don't know what happened," he admitted, his voice shaking. It was like something else took control. They salvaged what information they could from the facility's computers before destroying the equipment. The data was encrypted, but one symbol appeared repeatedly, a stylized blade shape that would later prove to be the emblem of the Phalanx. It was during one such mission, when they were both 21, that their relationship shifted irrevocably. They had been sent to investigate unusual predator behavior in the northern mountains, reports of shadow predators abandoning their traditional hunting grounds and moving en masse toward an unexplored valley. What they discovered was a natural disaster in the making. A massive landslide had dammed a river, creating a lake that was rising dangerously close to flooding an extensive cave system that served as a breeding ground for several species. Working together, they managed to create a controlled breach in the natural dam, releasing the water gradually rather than in a catastrophic flood. But as they completed their work, the weakened ground beneath Kalia gave way. She plunged into the raging waters below. Without hesitation, Keon dove after her. The current was savage, dragging them both towards a series of rapids. Using his enhanced strength, Keon managed to reach Kalia and pull her to his chest. The markings on his body blazed with light as he pushed his abilities to their limit, sensing the flow of the water, anticipating the current's movements. They survived, washing up on a muddy bank miles downstream. Soaked and exhausted, they took shelter in a small cave as night fell, bringing with it a dangerous drop in temperature. "We need to get warm," Keon said, gathering what dry brush he could find near the entrance to build a fire. Kalia watched him, shivering violently. "The water was so cold. I couldn't think, couldn't swim." "I know." Keon finally got a small flame going, carefully nurturing it into a proper fire. "I felt your panic. It called to me somehow." She moved closer to the fire, her silver eyes reflecting the flames. "You've risked your life for me twice now. Once as children, and again today. And I'd do it again tomorrow," he said simply, sitting beside her. "Why?" The question hung between them, though both knew the answer. Instead of responding with words, Keon reached out, gently tracing the pattern of ceremonial markings on her face, symbols of her royal lineage that all Signian nobility wore with pride. His touch left trails of warmth on her cold skin. "You know why?" he finally said. In the flickering firelight, surrounded by the primal wilderness of Cygnus Prime, they acknowledged what had been growing between them for years. Their kiss transcended species, politics, tradition, a connection as natural and inevitable as the bond between Keon and the planet itself. They returned to the city changed. Their relationship deepened beyond friendship or the familial connection imposed by Vorlog's adoption of Keon. They kept their feelings private, aware of the complications it would create at court, but those closest to them, including Vorlog himself, saw the truth in their eyes. The High Counselor said nothing directly, but he began assigning them separate missions, perhaps hoping distance would cool their connection. It didn't. If anything, it strengthened their resolve. By the time they reached their 22nd year, Keon had become a legend among the Signians. The Shadow-Touched, they called him, the human who spoke with predators and moved with their deadly grace. He had embraced his role as protector of Cygnus Prime, using his unique abilities to maintain balance between the civilized cities and the wild beyond. Kalia had grown into her position as heir apparent, respected for her wisdom and strength of character. Together, They represented a new kind of future for Cygnus Prime, one that embraced connection rather than isolation, adaptation rather than stagnation. It was this future that the arrival of the Phalanx threatened to destroy. The command center was already crowded with Cygnian officials when they arrived. Vorlog stood at the center, his face grim, as he studied a three-dimensional projection hovering above the main console. "What is it?" Kalia asked, pushing her way forward. Vorlog looked up, his silver eyes finding first his daughter, then Kian. "A ship has entered our orbit, like nothing we've ever encountered before." The projection showed a massive vessel, its design reminiscent of a blade, all sharp angles and gleaming metal, utterly unlike the organic curves of Cygnian architecture. "Have they made contact?" Kian asked, studying the image with narrowed eyes. "Yes," Vorlog replied. "They call themselves the Phalanx. They're requesting permission to send a delegation to the surface." "For what purpose?" Kalia demanded. Before Vorlog could answer, the projection shifted, replaced by the image of a humanoid figure. Its appearance was vaguely similar to both humans and Cygnians in basic structure, but their all resemblance ended. Its skin had a metallic sheen, and various technological augmentations were visible across its body. Its eyes were the most unsettling feature, pupilless orbs of cold, calculating intelligence. "Greetings, High Counselor Vorlog of Cygnus Prime," the figure said, its voice unnaturally precise and modulated. "I am Praetor, Supreme Commander of the Phalanx Collective. We come with a proposition of mutual benefit." Vorlog stepped forward, his posture straight and dignified. "We welcome peaceful visitors to Cygnus Prime, Commander Praetor. What proposition do you bring to our world?" "One of survival," Praetor replied. "A threat approaches that endangers all sentient life in this sector of space. We call it the Swarm, an unstoppable biological contagion that consumes everything in its path. We offer the protection of our fleet and technology." Kian felt a chill run down his spine. Something about Praetor's words rang false, though he couldn't identify why. The markings on his arm tingled uncomfortably. "Any protection comes with a price," Vorlog stated carefully. "What would you ask in return?" "An alliance sealed through union," Praetor said smoothly. "Princess Kalia would join with my heir, uniting our peoples through blood. Additionally, we request access to the unique flora and fauna of your world for research purposes. Their biological properties may prove crucial in our fight against the Swarm." Kian tensed, his hand instinctively tightening around his weapon. Kalia's face remained impassive, but he could sense her shock and revulsion at the proposal. Praetor's gaze shifted slightly, focusing on Kian with sudden interest. "I see you harbor a human among your ranks. Fascinating. We had thought their exploration vessel lost in this sector some years ago." "Kian is my adopted son," Vorlog declared firmly, "and a respected member of our society." "How progressive of you," Praetor remarked, his tone suggesting anything but approval. "We will await your response to our proposal, High Counselor. Consider carefully. The Swarm grows stronger with each passing day." The projection vanished, leaving the command center in tense silence. "You can't seriously be considering this," Kalia said immediately, turning to her father. Vorlog moved to a private chamber adjacent to the command center, gesturing for Kian and Kalia to follow. Once the doors sealed behind them, he sank heavily into a chair, suddenly looking every year of his considerable age. "I must consider all options that ensure the survival of our people," he said wearily. "It's a trap," Kian stated flatly. "I felt it. There's something wrong about their story, about them. They're not protectors, they're conquerors." Kalia placed a hand on her father's arm. "I will not be a bargaining chip in their game. We can protect ourselves." Vorlog looked up at them both, his expression pained. "Your youth speaks for you. You haven't seen true war. I have witnessed entire civilizations fall to technologically superior forces. I must examine all possibilities." Kian paced the room, the markings on his arm pulsing more visibly now. "There's something else. When Praetor looked at me, I felt targeted, like I was being assessed as a specimen rather than a person." "You're imagining threats where none exist," Vorlog dismissed. "You've always been suspicious of outsiders." "With good reason," Kian countered. "My people came to this sector in peace, And now I'm the only one left. Kalia stepped between them before the argument could escalate. Father, give us time to investigate before you make any decision. If the swarm is real, we should find evidence of it. How do you propose to do that? Vorlog asked. Keon stopped pacing, a plan forming in his mind. The horizon. Your father's ship, Kalia asked, but it's been abandoned for years. Not entirely, Tion explained. Before he died, my father maintained the ship's long-range sensors and emergency power systems. If there's a biological threat moving through nearby space, the horizon scanners might have detected it. Vorlog considered this. The ship lies in dangerous territory beyond even the Shadow Forest. I know the way, Kian said confidently. And between Kaelia and me, we can handle whatever threats we encounter. After a long moment, Vorlog nodded. You have 3 days. Find me evidence one way or the other. But know this, if the threat is real, I will do whatever necessary to protect our people, regardless of personal cost. Kian and Kaelia exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of the situation. We leave at dawn, Kian said. The journey to the crash site of the horizon took them through some of the most dangerous terrain on Cygnus Prime. They traveled light, carrying only essential supplies and weapons. Kian led the way, his connection to the planet's ecosystem allowing him to sense predators before they came into view. As they crossed a vast stretch of blue grassland on the first day, Kaelia noticed how Kian would occasionally stop, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. What do you sense? She asked during one such pause. Life, he replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. All around us, hunting, feeding, surviving. He pointed to a distant ridge where nothing was visible to Kaelia's eyes. A herd of ridgebacks is moving south. Something spooked them. Kaelia squinted, seeing nothing. You can feel them from here? Not just feel, I can sense their fear. The markings on his arm pulsed subtly. It's getting stronger, Kaelia. This connection. Sometimes I wake up and can feel every predator within 10 miles of the city. She studied his face, noting the tension in his jaw. Does it frighten you? What frightens me is not knowing the limits, he admitted. How far will it spread? Will I remain myself or will I become something else? Before she could respond, Kian suddenly stiffened, his expression changing from contemplative to alert. Down, he hissed, pulling her into the tall blue grass. Moments later, a shadow passed overhead, a phalanx scout ship, its sleek metallic form moving in a precise search pattern across the grasslands. They're looking for something, Kaelia whispered as the ship made another pass. Or someone. Kian's eyes followed the vessel. They're methodical. That's the third sweep of this sector. They remained hidden until the ship moved beyond the horizon. When they finally resumed their journey, both were more cautious, using ravines and stands of trees for cover whenever possible. Night fell before they reached the mountain range where the horizon lay. They made camp in a small cave, its entrance concealed by hanging vines. As Kian prepared a small, smokeless fire, Kaelia unrolled a portable scanner she had brought from the city. I've been monitoring Phalanx communications, she explained, activating the device. They're being careful, but occasional transmissions leak through their encryption. What have you learned? Kian asked, sitting beside her. They're collecting specimens, not just shadow predators, but all apex predators on Cygnus Prime. She showed him the data patterns, and they're especially active in areas where you've spent significant time over the years. Kian's expression darkened. The training grounds in the eastern forest, the northern river valley where we built the outpost last year. Exactly. It's as if they're tracking your movements through the predator populations you have interacted with. She looked up at him. Kian, I think they knew about you before they arrived. I think you're the real reason they came. The hidden facility we found last year, Kian said grimly. The Phalanx have been studying this planet, and me, for longer than we realized. The realization settled heavily between them. Whatever the Phalanx wanted, it was connected to Kian's unique bond with Cygnus Prime's ecosystem. All the more reason to reach the horizon, he said grimly. My father's records might tell us what they're really after. They ate a simple meal in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As Kaelia took first watch, Kian tried to rest, but sleep brought unsettling dreams, images of sterile laboratories, captive predators and pain. And through it all, Predor's cold, assessing gaze fixed on him. He awoke with a start, the markings on his arm glowing faintly in the darkness. Kalia was instantly at his side, her hand on his shoulder. "Another nightmare?" she asked softly. "Not exactly." Kian sat up, rubbing his face. "More like echoes. I can feel them, Kalia. The creatures they have captured. They're in pain, confused, and somehow they're reaching out to me." She didn't question the possibility. After years of witnessing his evolving abilities, little about his connection to the planet's wildlife surprised her anymore. "Can you reach back, communicate with them?" "Not from this distance. Not yet." He looked at his marked arm thoughtfully. "But it's like they're trying to tell me something. Something about the phalanx and their true intentions." At dawn, they continued their journey, climbing into the foothills of the mountain range. The terrain grew more challenging, with loose scree making each step treacherous. By midday, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and the distant rumble of thunder warned of an approaching storm. "We need to find shelter," Kalia said, eyeing the darkening sky with concern. "Storms in these mountains can be deadly." Kian paused, scanning their surrounding bone. His connection to the environment gave him an advantage in situations like this, an innate sense of where safety might be found. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow fissure in the rock face ahead. "It leads to a cave system. We can wait out the storm there." They had barely reached the shelter when the storm broke with savage intensity. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the very mountains. Rain fell in blinding sheets, quickly turning the path they had climbed into a cascading waterfall of mud and debris. Inside the cave, they found unexpected evidence of previous inhabitants, ancient markings on the walls depicting creatures similar to shadow predators, but larger, more fearsome. The Signian ancestors worshipped them, Kalia explained, tracing the images with her fingers. They believed the great predators were messengers of the planet itself, harbingers of balance in times of chaos. Kian studied the primitive artwork, particularly a central figure that appeared to show a being half Signian, half predator. "What's this one?" "The Mediator," Kalia said quietly, "a mythical figure who could speak to both worlds, the civilized and the wild. The stories say when the balance tipped too far in either direction, the Mediator would appear to restore harmony." The parallels to Kian's own situation were unmistakable. He stared at the ancient image, unsettled by the implications. "You think it's about me? Some prophecy?" Kalia shook her head. "I think it's about a role that has always been needed. Perhaps every few generations, someone emerges who can bridge the divide." She looked directly at him. "My people were once more connected to this world, before technology and cities separated us from our origins. Maybe what happened to you isn't random, Kian. Maybe Cygnus Prime chose you." "If that's true," Kian said, running his fingers over the ancient image, "then what the phalanx is doing, extracting the venom, capturing predators, it's not just an attack on the wildlife. It's an attempt to break the planet's natural balance." The storm raged through the night, forcing them to remain in the cave until morning. When they finally emerged, the landscape had been transformed. Trees uprooted, new waterfalls cascading down rock faces, the path ahead obscured by fallen debris. "This will slow us down," Keen observed, surveying the damage. "We still have time," Kalia assured him. "Father won't make any decision about the phalanx proposal for at least another day." They picked their way carefully through the altered terrain, Kian's instincts guiding them around unstable areas. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that overlooked a vast valley below. "There," Kian said, pointing to a distant gleam of metal partly buried in the side of a mountain. "The horizon." As they began their descent, a sound from above made them freeze. Another phalanx scout ship was approaching, this one moving with purpose directly toward the crashed vessel. "They're looking for the same answers we are," Kalia realized. "We need to hurry." Kian led her on a faster path downward, taking risks they would normally avoid. Twice they nearly fell when handholds crumbled beneath their fingers, but each time, Kian's enhanced reflexes saved them. They reached the valley floor as the phalanx ship circled the horizon crash site. To their alarm, it began to lower landing gear. "We'll never reach it before they land," Kalia said, breathing hard from their rapid descent. Kian closed his eyes, focusing on the unique sense that connected him to the planet's wildlife. He reached out, searching for any predators in the vicinity. There, a pack of smaller hunters, similar to wolves but with 6 legs and armored scales, was denning nearby. "We don't need to beat them there," he said, opening his eyes. "We just need to distract them." Concentrating intensely, he projected an impression of threat and opportunity toward the pack. Danger near their territory, but also potential prey. The effort left him dizzy, the markings on his arm burning with increased intensity. The response was immediate. The pack erupted from their hiding place, charging toward the landing phalanx ship with coordinated precision. They weren't attacking blindly. Keon had conveyed specific targets, the ship's external sensors and landing apparatus. The phalanx crew, caught off guard by the sudden assault, aborted their landing. The ship rose hastily, its defensive systems activating to repel the creatures. In the confusion, Keon and Kalia sprinted the remaining distance to the horizon. "That was remarkable," Kalia said as they reached the human vessel. "Your control is getting stronger." "Not control," Keon corrected, leaning against the ship's hull to catch his breath. "Cooperation. I asked, they chose to help." He looked troubled. "But it's draining. Using the connection deliberately like that, it takes something from me each time." They found the access hatch his father had maintained, still secure after all these years. Keon entered the code, his own birthday, a sentimental choice his father had made, and the door slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The interior of the ship was dark and silent, the air stale but breathable. Keon moved with confidence through the corridors, finding his way to the bridge by memory and instinct. "The emergency power cells should still have some charge," he said, accessing a control panel. The console flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow across the abandoned bridge. "How do we access the sensor logs?" Kalia asked, looking around at the unfamiliar human technology. "My father taught me the basics." Keon's fingers moved across the interface, bringing up various systems. "It will take some time to—" He stopped abruptly as the main view screen activated, displaying a star chart of the surrounding sector. There was no indication of any large-scale biological threat moving through space. "Run a full diagnostic," Kalia suggested. "Maybe the sensors are malfunctioning." Keon initiated the program. Sensors are operating at 60% capacity, enough to detect any major anomaly in the sector. He looked up at her. "There's no swarm, at least not that the horizon can detect." "So they lied," Kalia said grimly. "But why?" Keon continued accessing different systems, searching for any information that might help them understand the phalanx's true intentions. A warning indicator flashed on one of the secondary screens. "What's that?" Kalia asked. "Proximity alert. The ship detected unusual activity near our orbit shortly before the phalanx arrived." Keon expanded the data. "They've been here before, sending small probes to the surface, for months." "Spying on us?" "Not just observing." Keon's expression darkened as he accessed more files. "According to this, they've been extracting biological samples, primarily from shadow predators," Kalia finished, understanding dawning. "That's why they're acting strangely, why they followed us. They've been hunted." Keon nodded, continuing to sift through the data. His heart nearly stopped when he found the next file, his father's personal log, recorded shortly before his death. "Play entry," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. A holographic image appeared. An older man with Keon's features, though weathered by years of survival on an alien world. "This is Dr. Alan Reed, chief xenobiologist of the Earth vessel Horizon," the recording began. "I've detected unusual activity in orbit, non-Cygnian vessels extracting specimens, primarily predatory species. I've analyzed the shadow predator venom that saved my son's life all those years ago. It contains a unique mutagenic agent unlike anything in Earth's biological catalog." The hologram shifted to display molecular structures. When bonded with human DNA, it creates a symbiotic relationship that allows not just survival but influence over similar genetic structures. Keon's connection to this world goes beyond mere adaptation. He's become a bridge between species. If others discover this capability, he would become a target, a potential weapon. Keon stared at the recording in shock. Kalia moved closer to him, her hand finding his shoulder. The venom didn't just save me, he whispered. It changed me at a fundamental level. Keon, Kalia said urgently, pointing to another console that had activated. The ship is picking up a transmission from orbit to the surface. They shifted their attention to the new data stream. The Horizon systems automatically decoded the transmission, revealing coordinates and deployment patterns. The Phalanx weren't just observing, they were actively collecting specimens from across Cygnus Prime. They're creating a biological weapon, Keon realized, the pieces falling into place, using the planet's most dangerous predators. And they need a catalyst, Kalia finished, something that can control these creatures. Her eyes met his. They're not hunting our planet, Keon. They're hunting you. Before Keon could respond, a new alert sounded, movement outside the ship. The external cameras activated automatically, showing a squad of Phalanx soldiers approaching the horizon, led by a figure Keon recognized immediately. Prictor. How did they find us? Kalia gasped. They must have been tracking us all along, Keon said, quickly shutting down the systems. We need to leave, now. But it was too late. The main hatch of the bridge slid open and Phalanx soldiers poured in, weapons trained on them. Prictor entered last, his metallic features set in a cold smile. Impressive intuition for such a primitive life form, he said, addressing Keon directly. You are indeed everything the data suggested you might be. Keon moved protectively in front of Kalia. What do you want from us? From her? Nothing from you. Praetor gestured to the holographic display of the venom's molecular structure, still visible on one screen. You are the key, a living weapon. With your unique biology, I will control an army of monsters engineered from the biomass of this planet. I'll die before I help you, Keon growled. You? Certainly. Praetor's gaze shifted to Kalia. But will she? Two soldiers grabbed Kalia. She fought fiercely, her years of training evident as she disabled the first attacker with a precise strike to his throat. But there were too many. A third soldier struck her from behind, and she fell to her knees, she's momentarily stunned. Rage surged through Keon. The markings on his arm blazed with dark light as he launched himself at the nearest soldiers. His enhanced reflexes made him nearly impossible to track as he moved through their ranks, disabling three before they could even raise their weapons. But Praetor remained unperturbed. He activated a device on his wrist, and a pulse of energy swept through the bridge. Keon stumbled, his muscles seizing as the energy disrupted his nervous system. Remarkable, Praetor observed as Keon struggled to remain standing. The symbiosis granted you tremendous physical capabilities, but you remain vulnerable to certain frequencies. Useful information. Two soldiers secured Keon's arms while another pressed a sedative injector against his neck. As consciousness began to fade, the last thing Keon saw was Kalia's desperate struggle against her captors. I'll find you, he promised, as darkness claimed him. Keon awoke strapped to a metal table in what appeared to be a laboratory aboard the Phalanx ship. Various machines surrounded him, monitoring his vital signs and the unusual patterns in his blood. The markings on his arm had spread further, now covering most of his upper body in a network of dark lines. Nearby, Kalia was confined in an energy field, conscious but unable to move. Her eyes found his immediately, relief evident in her expression when she saw he was awake. The sedative should have kept you unconscious for hours longer. Praetor's voice came from across the lab. The Phalanx commander approached, studying readouts from the various monitors. Another indication of your body's remarkable adaptability. Keon tested his restraints, finding them unyielding. Whatever you're planning won't work. On the contrary, Praetor replied, it already is working. Your blood contains the key component we've been searching for, a bridge between consciousness and primitive genetic imperatives. The perfect control mechanism for our biological weapons. You created this swarm, didn't you? Keon accused. It's not some external threat. It's your own creation. Praetor smiled coldly. Very good. The swarm is indeed our design, a controlled biological weapon that can target specific genetic markers. But controlling it proved challenging. Until we discovered you. He gestured to a large viewport at the far end of the laboratory. Beyond the transparent barrier, Keon could see rows of containment cells, each holding various predatory creatures from Cygnus Prime. Most prominent were the shadow predators, pacing restlessly in their cages. Soon, your genetic material will provide the final component for our control mechanism, Pretor continued. Your sacrifice will usher in a new era of order, technological order. Kian closed his eyes, focusing inward. The venom that had become part of him for the past 10 years pulsed through his system. It had changed him, yes, but not in the way Pretor believed. The connection wasn't about control. It was about harmony, about understanding. You're wrong, Kian said, his voice surprisingly calm. You think the venom made me your tool, your key to controlling other life forms. But it didn't give me control. It connected me to this world. Pretor looked amused. Semantics, connection, control, the result is the same. Your genetic material will bond with our engineered organisms, allowing us to direct them as weapons. No, Kian insisted. You misunderstand the fundamental nature of the bond. He looked directly at Kalia. It's not about domination. It's about symbiosis, mutual respect, something your kind would never comprehend. The markings on his arm began to pulse more rapidly, glowing with an inner light that cast shadows across the laboratory. Kian closed his eyes again, reaching out with his mind, with the part of him that had become one with Cygnus Prime. He didn't seek to control the captured predators. Instead, he shared with them his pain, his rage, his determination to protect the world that had become his home. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The creatures in their cages began to howl and thrash, their fury matching his own. Alarms blared throughout the ship as containment fields began to fail. One after another, Pretor spun toward the viewport, his confidence replaced by genuine alarm as he saw the chaos unfolding in the holding area. What have you done? He demanded. Kian couldn't respond. He was focused entirely on maintaining the connection, on fueling the rage of the captured creatures. The strain was enormous, blood trickling from his nose with the effort, but he didn't relent. The first shadow predator broke free, tearing through the remaining barriers to its cage. Others followed. An unstoppable tide of primal fury unleashed in the heart of the failing ship. The creatures didn't attack randomly, they moved with purpose, targeting power systems and control mechanisms as if guided by an intelligence beyond their own. The ship shuddered violently as critical systems began to fail. Emergency lights flashed, bathing the laboratory in pulsing red. Pretor barked orders into his communication device, but the growing chaos drowned out his commands. Kill him, Pretor finally shouted to the guards still in the lab. Kill him now before he brings down the entire ship. Two guards raised their weapons, but Kalia had already moved. With the fighting skills honed through years of training alongside Kian, she disarmed the first guard with a precise strike to his wrist, then used his momentum to throw him into the second. The collision gave her enough time to grab the fallen weapon. Don't move, she commanded, aiming at Pretor. Release him, now. Pretor's metallic features twisted into a cold smile. You're too late. The process has already begun. Kian's body convulsed on the table, the machinery around him humming at an increasing pitch. His blood was being extracted, processed, and altered. The first step in creating Pretor's biological weapon. Kalia fired a warning shot that sizzled past Pretor's head. Stop the procedure. You don't understand what's at stake, Pretor replied, remarkably calm despite the chaos erupting throughout the ship. The Phalanx has spent decades perfecting biological warfare. His unique physiology is the final component we need. With it, we can control entire ecosystems, turn them into weapons, or simply eradicate them if they prove uncooperative. A massive explosion rocked the ship, throwing Kalia off balance. Pretor seized the opportunity, lunging toward a control panel. His fingers flew across the interface, initiating a secondary protocol. If I can't have his abilities, Pretor snarled, I'll ensure no one else does either. A new alarm sounded, this one more urgent than the others. On a nearby screen, a countdown appeared, the numbers rapidly decreasing. Ship-wide purge initiated, an automated voice announced. All biological specimens will be terminated in 3 minutes. All personnel proceed to evacuation pods. Kalia fired at the restraint system, holding Kian. the energy blast destroying the mechanism. He rolled free, staggering as his feet hit the floor. The extended use of his connection had drained him physically, but adrenaline kept him moving. "We need to get out of here," he gasped, blood still trickling from his nose and ears. "And we need to free any creatures still alive." Peter backed toward an exit, his expression calculating. "You've doomed yourselves. The purge will release a toxin lethal to all biological life forms. Not even your unique adaptations can save you from that, human." "Then we better hurry," Keen replied, finding new strength as the immediate danger cleared his mind. Peter fled, sealing the laboratory door behind him. Kalia blasted the control panel, forcing the door open manually. In the corridor beyond, chaos reigned. Phalanx crew members ran in all directions, focused solely on reaching escape pods before the purge completed. "This way," Kian said, his senses guiding him through the unfamiliar ship. Despite his exhaustion, the markings on his body pulsed with renewed energy, as if the very threat to his life had activated some final reserve. They fought their way through panicked crew members, Kalia taking the lead when they encountered armed resistance. Her combat training proved invaluable as she disabled opponents with precise, non-lethal strikes. 2 minutes until biological purge, the automated system announced. "We're not going to make it," Kalia said as they reached a junction where 3 corridors met. Kian closed his eyes, reaching out with his special sense. "This way," he said, suddenly turning left. "I can feel them. Some are still alive." They sprinted down the corridor, finding themselves in a secondary containment area. Here, smaller specimens were held, not just shadow predators, but dozens of species from Cygnus Prime, all in transparent cells lining the walls. 1 minute until biological purge. "We'll never free them all in time," Kalia said desperately. Kian approached the central control panel. "We don't need to." His hands moved across the interface with surprising confidence, as if the knowledge of how to operate it was being fed directly to his brain. "We just need to override the purge protocols in this section and release the emergency evacuation sequence." The ship shuddered again as another explosion tore through a distant section. Fires were beginning to spread through the ventilation systems. 30 seconds until biological purge. With a final command entered, Kian stepped back from the console. A new alarm sounded, and the floor beneath the containment cells began to reconfigure. One by one, the cells were sealed into self-contained pod, then ejected through ports in the outer hull. "Emergency specimen preservation protocol engaged," a different automated voice announced. "Ejection complete." Kian swayed on his feet, the last of his strength fading. Kalia caught him before he could fall. "Now us," she said, supporting his weight as they continued down the corridor. 10 seconds until biological purge. They turned a corner and found themselves facing an evacuation bay. Only one pod remained, Suomoin, its hatch open and waiting. With a final burst of speed that they moved, they threw themselves inside, Kalia slapping the launch control as they cleared the threshold. The hatch sealed just as a white mist began to fill the corridor outside. The pod detached from the Phalanx ship with a jolt, small thrusters guiding it away from the dying vessel. Through the viewport, they watched as secondary explosions rippled across the massive ship, tearing it apart from within. Debris scattered across space, some of it beginning to burn as it entered Cygnus Prime's atmosphere. "Will they survive?" Kalia asked quietly, her gaze on the smaller pods that had ejected from the containment area. "The creatures?" Kian nodded, certainty filling him. "The pods are designed for preservation. They'll enter the atmosphere at a controlled rate, land safely." He closed his eyes, extending his awareness. "I can feel them already. They're afraid but alive. They're going home." As their own pod began its descent towards Cygnus Prime, Kalia took Kian's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. The contact sent a warm pulse through the markings on his skin, like recognition between kindred spirits. "What you did up there," she said softly. "I've never seen anything like it." "Neither had I," he admitted. "I didn't know I could reach that far, connect that deeply." He looked down at the markings on his arm, now pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "I'm still changing, Kalia. Still becoming something new." "Something better," she said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Something that bridges worlds." The pod shuddered as it entered the atmosphere, flames streaking past the viewport. Keon felt the pull of Cygnus Prime beneath them. Not just the physical gravity, but something deeper, a connection that had been growing within him for over a decade. The planet was calling him home. What happens now, he asked, suddenly uncertain despite their escape. Praetor may be gone, but the Phalanx is an entire civilization. They'll send others. Then we'll be ready, Kalia replied with quiet determination. What happened today proves something my father has suspected for years, that your connection to Cygnus Prime isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's a defense mechanism, a way for the planet itself to create balance. Kian considered this as the pod continued its descent, the flames outside giving way to clouds as they passed through the upper atmosphere. The idea that his transformation had a greater purpose was both comforting and terrifying. If that's true, he said slowly, then I need to understand it better. Master it completely. We will, Kalia promised. Together. The pod's parachutes deployed with a sharp jerk, slowing their descent for the final approach. Through the clearing clouds, Keon could see the vast blue forests of Cygnus Prime spreading below them, welcoming him back to the only home he had ever truly known. As they drifted downward, a movement caught his eye. Shapes moving through the forest canopy, converging on their projected landing site. Shadow predators, dozens of them, flowing like living shadows beneath the trees. We have company, he said, nodding toward the viewport. Kalia tensed, reaching for her weapon. Hostile? No, Kian smiled slightly, the markings on his arm pulsing in sync with the movement of the creatures below. They're coming to welcome us home. 3 days later, they stood on the balcony of the High Council chamber, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. Vorlog stood between them, his posture straight and dignified, despite the weight of recent events. The Phalanx will send others, he said, echoing Keon's earlier concern. Their kind does not abandon a target easily. Let them come, Kalia replied, her voice steady with newfound confidence. We understand their true nature now. We won't be deceived again. Keon gazed out at the horizon where the first rays of sunlight illuminated the distant mountains. In the forest below, he could sense the shadow predators that had followed them back to the city, not entering the urban areas, but establishing a perimeter of sorts, a protective ring of watchful guardians. We need to prepare, he said, not just militarily, but by strengthening our connection to this world. The Signians have been disconnected from the wild for too long. Vorlog nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that is why you came to us, Kian of Earth, to remind us of what we once were, not just masters of technology and civilization, but part of the greater web of life on Cygnus Prime. For the first time, Keon noticed how the morning light caught the fading remains of the Phalanx ship, turning the debris into a brief, brilliant display before it disappeared from view. What had been meant as an invasion had instead catalyzed a transformation, for him, for Kalia, and potentially for the future of Cygnus Prime. There's something else we need to discuss, Father, Kalia said, her tone shifting to something more personal. She glanced at Keon, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded, encouraging her to continue. The bond between Keon and me, she stated plainly. It's more than friendship, more than the connection of adopted siblings. I believe you've known this for some time. Vorlog's expression remained neutral, though his eyes softened as he looked between them. I have observed the development of your relationship with both concern and hope. The political implications are complex. With respect, Keon interjected, politics shouldn't dictate matters of the heart. A smile touched Vorlog's lips. Bold words from one who has spent the last decade learning our political systems. He sighed, turning to face the sunrise again. But perhaps boldness is what Cygnus Prime needs now. Old traditions must sometimes yield to new realities. He placed a hand on each of their shoulders, the gesture bridging the space between them. What exists between you transcends our ancient prejudices. Perhaps it is time for our people to see that strength can be found in union, not separation. Keon felt a weight lift from his chest, a tension he had carried for years without fully acknowledging it. He reached for Kalia's hand, no longer concerned about who might see or what they might think. There will be opposition, Vorlog warned, those who cling to the old ways, who fear change in any form. Like Nerix once did, Keon noted, remembering the elder who had once tried to turn the council against him. Nerix was exiled for his treachery, Vorlog reminded him, but others share his views, if not his methods. They will resist what you represent. Then we will face it together, Kalia said, her fingers tightening around Keon's, as we have faced everything else. From the edge of the forest, a shadow predator emerged, larger than any Keon had seen before. It moved with deliberate purpose, crossing the open ground between the wild and the city, a boundary no predator had crossed in living memory. Guards on the city walls raised their weapons, but Vorlog held up his hand, stopping them. "Wait," he commanded. The creature approached the base of the tower where they stood, its amber eyes fixed on Keon. It made no threatening moves, simply waiting, as if delivering a message. Keon closed his eyes, reaching out with his special sense. Images flooded his mind, other predators gathering, not just shadow predators but all the apex hunters of Cygnus Prime, moving together with unusual coordination. "What is it?" Kalia asked, recognizing the look on his face. "They're mobilizing," Keon said, opening his eyes. "All of them. They sense something coming." "The phalanx?" Vorlog asked. "No, something else. Something—" Keon struggled to interpret the impressions flowing through his connection. "Something that threatens the balance of the entire planet. The shadow predators are responding to it, just as they did when the phalanx began their secret operations here years ago. They're the planet's first defense." As if in confirmation, the great predator below raised its head and unleashed a roar that echoed across the city. A sound of warning, a preparation for battle. "Then we will face it," Vorlog declared, his voice strong with resolve, "not just as Cygnians, but as children of this world, with all its creatures as our allies." Keon looked at Kalia, seeing in her silver eyes the same determination he felt growing within himself. What had begun as a desperate act of courage in a forbidden forest had evolved into something far greater, a new alliance between civilization and wilderness. Together, he agreed, the markings on his body pulsing with renewed purpose. The shadow predator's venom had not been a curse, but a gift, the means by which a lone human child had found not just a home, but a destiny. The sun rose fully over Cygnus Prime, bathing them all in golden light. Human, Cygnian, and predator alike, united in defense of the world they all called home.